This is Metro Week. Our top story, the economic forecast for the Tucson region. We'll interview the University of Arizona's chief forecasting economist. Then our Journalists Roundtable analyzes the week's news.
Welcome to Metro Week. I'm Andrea Kelly. We've reported that Tucson's economic recovery lags the rest of the state and the nation. Now we look ahead. What's in store for the region in the next year, 2 years? Here are the data. Tucson's economy is growing, and it will continue to grow. The signs are readily available in some industries, such as housing, and in wages, which are rising. The news is not all good, but we'll start with a positive sign. Per capita income is expected to rise faster than inflation for the next 2 years, and that means people will see that wage growth more than in years when it is canceled by inflation. The region is also adding jobs, but slower than the rest of the state. The Phoenix and Arizona job growth rates have exceeded 2%, while Tucson's has been closer to 0. Even in the next few years, when job growth gains speed here, it will lag the statewide growth prediction of 2.6%. One two-sided coin for Tucson is its dependence on federal defense spending, from research at the University of Arizona to the workforce at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base to contracts for products from Raytheon. Because federal spending has been down, Tucson's economy has been hurt, but the forecast shows more defense spending ahead. For a deeper look at what those numbers mean, I interviewed George Hammond. He directs the Economic and Business Research Center at the Eller College of Management, the business school at the U of A. Hammond is in charge of analyzing local economic data, including impact studies for industries. He's the author of the regional forecast. Your forecast calls for continued slow growth for Tucson. Why is that?
Well, it's connected to some of the reasons that we've seen slow growth over the past couple of years. Fiscal drag will still be an issue. I think federal fiscal drag, meaning relatively slow federal government spending, will be less of a drag than it was over the past couple of years. So I think we'll see a little bit of an acceleration there, but I think state fiscal drag will still be with us. And I think we're kind of going to gradually accelerate, but I don't think we're really headed back to the kind of growth rates that we saw during the 30 years before the Great Recession. Part of that is just demographics. As the population ages, people drop out of the labor force, and that just means slower long-run growth. We'll see the same kind of phenomenon there with the state and the nation. So Tucson's not alone in that.
So are you saying this is a long-term pattern? We should just keep expecting slower growth?
Yes, I think we're in for slower growth over the next 30 years than we saw during the previous 30 years, and that's primarily driven by demographics. But in the short run, I think we've actually got a chance to see growth accelerate a little bit, and that's due to a little bit of the reduction in federal fiscal drag, that reduced federal spending. It becomes less of a drag than it was over the past couple of years. And I think we've actually got a chance to see residential mobility across the U.S. pick up. One of the hallmarks of the recovery so far has been a reduction in the degree to which people are moving across states. And I think as U.S. wage growth picks up some steam and as house prices across the nation continue to rise, we'll see households that are underwater on their mortgages. We'll see fewer of them underwater on mortgages, and that will allow them to move around the country more. That will boost population growth across Arizona, I think in Tucson as well. And that will also help to boost our so-called growth industries like construction, retail trade, and real estate related sectors. And that will help to drive our growth just a little bit faster over the next couple of years.
So that's kind of what the movement of people could mean. What can area leadership in southern Arizona and in Tucson do to maybe try to help the recovery and the growth speed up a little bit?
Sure. I think the best thing that state and local governments can do is to focus on the building blocks of long-run economic growth. And that boils down to human capital, and in particular educational attainment. So investing additional resources in really all levels of education would really benefit Arizona. In addition to that, I think we need to invest in infrastructure. We need to be able to move people and goods and services efficiently, both within and among metropolitan areas, states, and nations. So we need high quality, well-maintained highways and roads. We need really good ports so we can move goods and people across the border efficiently and safely. We need a high quality telecommunications infrastructure. You know, the internet's going to be more important over the next 30 years than it even is now. And we need an airport that's well connected and efficient so that people can get around the U.S. and move around internationally effectively.
You're talking about the need to improve these areas of infrastructure, and I know that local government officials are trying to figure out how to pay for those improvements. The bond election that just failed in Pima County, but the city has some bonds that are improving those roads. Do you have, as an economist, any idea of what the best way to pay for infrastructure improvements would be?
Well, the best way to pay at this point is what people will agree to. So you've got to find ways to justify the investments that we need in such a way that people will fund it, and whether that's through increased taxes or through increased taxes on consumption, like gasoline taxes, or whether it's related to bond issuances. Either one of those works. I think the issue is to make the right case that these investments will generate that stronger growth in the long run.
What kinds of decisions could be made at the state level that could potentially help or harm Tucson's local economy?
Well, at the state level, what we've seen over the past year is that state fiscal drag has been added to the federal fiscal drag that we've been dealing with for the past couple of years. So, hopefully we won't see any more budget cuts that affect the university system and the U of A in particular. That had an impact on our overall economic growth. We lost about 300 jobs at the university level. It also affected or local government activities. So, let's hope that we see the university system, that the state government sees the university system as the asset that it is. And that they continue to fund that or increase funding for it.
And then at the local level, should Tucson businesses and leaders and government officials be focused on trying to get some of that funding back from the state and federal government, or should they be focused on diversifying our areas of growth?
Probably both. One of the hallmarks of the Tucson economy is that we're very concentrated in government activity.
Which is why then federal and state budget cuts, fiscal drag, hurt us so much.
That's right.
Okay.
Federal government activity is about twice as important to Tucson as it is to the state or the nation. State government activity is also much more important locally than it is for the state or the nation, and that's because of the presence of the U of A in Tucson. So certainly diversification is something that we should think about. Diversifying that industrial base is good. That's hard to do. It takes a long time to do that, but that's certainly a worthy goal as we look to the future.
How do you make your forecasts? How do you figure out what the economy is going to be doing in 2016 and 2017 when you're sitting here in 2015? What do you do? How do you do your job?
Well, it's based on mathematical models that draw correlations between what's happening nationally and locally with whatever variable we're trying to forecast. So we look carefully at what's happening to the national economy, what's happening with interest rates, what's going on with fiscal policy, and what's happening internationally to the value of the US dollar, which has changed a lot over the past year. And then we use the mathematical model, the statistical model, to pin down those correlations. And then we rely on projections or assumptions about what will happen with fiscal and monetary policy and how that plays out nationally. And then those assumptions play down to the state and local level.
And those assumptions sound like they're really based in the politics and social decisions that you can't use a model to say, figure out what Congress is going to decide about federal spending next year.
No, the key is that we make clearly defined assumptions about what will happen with fiscal and monetary policy in the future. And then from that, at least we know what the forecast is based on. And then from there, we draw out these conclusions for what that will mean in terms of state and local economic growth. So it's a very systematic approach. It's not waving a finger in the air and guessing. It's a systematic approach that allows us to learn more about the economy as we forecast over time.
And are there sort of, in science, there's peer reviews of scientific experiments. Do you have sort of a peer system where you all use similar models for forecasting that are tested, tried and true?
Sure. The models that we use in the Economic and Business Research Center have been in use over the past 30 years. So this is a way of forecasting that is standard in the industry. We've updated the techniques as the science have evolved, but the general principles are well known and well understood and widely used across most state and local areas.
Do you go back and check if you were right?
We do.
How do you do that? Or what are you looking at when you do that?
We look at how the model is tracking in terms of the forecast lining up with what eventually happens, and where we find differences, where the model seems to be losing track of what's actually happening. Then we go back and look at the underlying assumptions, and then make some changes where those seem justified, and then we see how that works in the future. And that's really where the knowledge creation of this comes in. We learn more about the economy as we dig in and try and understand what the model is not capturing that's currently driving things.
You're an economist and I'm a journalist, and we talk about regional outlooks, forecasts like this to kind of get a gauge on where the region might be heading. But what does this mean for somebody who just lives and works in Tucson? What can they draw from your forecast?
Well, what you want to look for in the forecast is what it says about job growth. So that's increasing employment opportunities locally. So it also suggests that we'll see somewhat faster wage and income growth over the next couple of years. So that's more money in our pockets that we can use to buy goods and services, all that good stuff that we really work for. In terms of policymakers, they watch this stuff so they can figure out what's happening in terms of the tax base, so they can determine what's happening with revenues and do their budgeting in that way. Builders, people involved in the construction, the residential housing industry, of course, are very interested in what's happening with population. So if they see a forecast of rising population growth, then that means there will be more demand for housing and things related to housing, all those appliances, and they'll plan accordingly.
George Hammond, thanks for coming in and explaining your economic forecast.
Hello, I'm Christopher Conover. Tonight on Arizona Week, guns, marijuana, and cocaine seized in just one night.
These people that are doing the smuggling are crossing international borders, committing multiple felonies, federal, state felonies, and they're desperate to get their drugs into our society.
Now our Journalists Roundtable. Joining me today, David Wickner of the Arizona Daily Star and David Rupp-Calvis of Tucson Local Media. So we're going to try and keep these Davids, both of you who cover business, keep you straight today. David Wickner, we'll start with you. I want to know if you heard anything new in that interview with George Hammond and also in this economic forecast.
There's always a little different focus year to year, but we've had this slow growth for a while, and that's the main message, and expect that to continue. They do have talked about the Mexican peso and its impact. Mexico's economy is improving with the strong dollar. That hurts our export growth. Mexico is one of our main trading partners, and also the tourists coming over to spend money here. The range of growth is right there where a lot of economists have been looking at, under 2%, kind of looking just to break out of that, but with federal spending down and us so dependent, it's a little bit of the same old story.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to stay slow, but at least it's slowly on the up instead of on the down, right? Now, David, what did you hear from Hammond about how we get out of this slow growth, the possible ways that the local economy can recharge and change this pace? What did you think of his ideas?
I thought they were probably accurate. The reality is we're probably not going to see any massive changes real fast. Obviously, the easiest and biggest way would see the federal and state government spend a lot more money, and that's probably not going to happen. You know, Davis-Monthan may get a boost. Raytheon may get a boost. You know, we're short on missiles. That's been in the news a lot lately, so you may see some more federal money, but it's not going to be a huge amount that's going to immediately change the economy. And the reality is, slow and steady, as long as you're going up, isn't a bad thing, you know.
It's just a shift from when we had the boom years right before the recession that were that were, steep increases in the economy. That's what makes it so different.
The economies are really weird things. They go up slow and steady, they fall really, really fast. And so it's going to take some time, but we are growing. That's a good thing. Almost every sector is growing. And so it's really good news, not great news, not something to jump up and down about. But as long as we're moving up and we're growing in a steady basis, then we're doing okay.
Have you seen any signs that the area is making any efforts to try and reduce the reliance on federal and state spending, or anything that's working in that direction?
Well, there's a lot of efforts to attract high-wage jobs, manufacturing jobs in particular. Aerospace has been a focus in the medical, in the biotech or biomedical space. Diagnostics, Tucson has attracted or grown a few medical diagnostics company that show some promise. On the sort of the small business side, the entrepreneurship side, we have a really strong group of organizations here, Startup Tucson and others, that are holding events to bring entrepreneurs together with investors. And the idea there is to home grow some businesses. Take some time, but companies like Ventana Medical Systems was founded here in the mid-'80s by a university professor, grew to be one of the biggest companies here, was sold off for several $billion. So there's a lot of ongoing efforts. The trick is how do you get either local high-wage employers like manufacturers or other companies to look here to bring those jobs. And it's the same old story. They look at site selectors look at education. People want to educate their family. We've not done well on that score. They look at infrastructure. The roads here are not good, and the voters haven't been willing, at least in the recent big bond package, to approve improvements to that. There are a lot of things that play into that, and there's a lot of efforts kind of to work on the components that attract business or cause business to expand. A lot of them haven't taken traction yet, but there are a lot of efforts going on.
I think David hit on one of the keys, and that's the homegrown businesses. Every economic development person in the world is trying to attract the new, great business to come in from somewhere else. But I think the key in Tucson, at least for the short term, is to support those small businesses that can grow, support the startup, get them started, get them to the point where they're hiring employees. And I think that will be the easiest way short term to boost our economy is inside Tucson.
Because it takes away that element of competition with other cities then. If somebody lives here, they're inclined to start here.
Everyone's trying to get that company to move there. And we're trying too. And we all hope that one day soon we'll get announcements coming out. But the reality is local businesses that expand and grow is the easiest way to get new jobs and to expand your economy.
What about efforts to improve economic relations with Mexico? Is that something that's going to really help the Tucson and the southern Arizona economy?
I think that could be a key for our area. There are efforts to improve cross-border trade, make it easier for goods and services to move across the borders. Excuse me. There's efforts to approve the Sonoran Corridor. Elements of that have been approved for the pending transportation bill, and basically make the whole job easier of moving goods and services, but also perhaps bringing companies here, we have a long maquiladora tradition. Mexico is seen as kind of the new China in terms of low, near sources for cheap labor, basically. So improving all that would be a big boost to the economy. However, there are problems with some of the ports. There are efforts to improve. There were some improvements at some of the ports. Now Douglas the port of Douglas is they're wanting to improve that port, which could be another avenue. They have to actually crane equipment over the border there because it's not wide enough to get mining equipment through. So there are several things in progress. How to come up with the funding, the timing is all really pretty much up in the air, but there is a strong logistics base here in Tucson, and there's a lot of interest in expanding that. And if you look at the Port of Tucson and some of the private enterprises involved with trade. They're trying to get together and bring government to the table to, in a very difficult fiscal situation, improve the movement, export goods.
David, one of the things that I asked George Hammond about and have asked him in the past about is whose role is it to kind of work on this? Should it be the private sector? Should it be the government? Should it be both working together? So along the lines of improving trade and economic relations with Mexico, the mayor has been driving that. Is he the right person?
He's a right person. I think it has to be a combination of a lot of people. I think you need local elected officials. I think you need statewide elected officials. I know the Tucson Hispanic Chamber does a really good job. They're constantly going back and forth to Mexico to try to increase trade. So I think it needs to be a combination of government and private sector. You know, government helps, and they certainly do spend some money with Mexico to help bring things across, but ultimately, to make it really succeed, it's got to be private sector, because they're the ones that will be buying goods and services and bringing things across and selling things back, you know, into Mexico. So I think it needs to be private sector, but the government certainly has to have a seat at the table and needs to be a driving factor behind that.
David, you mentioned the strength of the dollar compared to the peso. What is Mexico's growing middle class and this currency comparison? What does that mean for the local economy?
Well, I think it's holding, the strong dollar is holding some of that growth back. We have a very large impact of shoppers and tourists coming over to spend money here. A stronger dollar hurts that. It also hurts our exports. So Mexico is slowly improving its economy, still have a lot of political issues to work through. But if the peso was stronger right now, we could be seeing more growth, I think. It's one of those macroeconomic forces that there's a lot at play there. So it's not an easy solution to prop up the peso. It's hurting right now.
David, another element in the forecast was George Hammond is predicting that housing starts will rise about 15% in the next 2 years. That's permits for new houses. Is that a sign that we could go right back into another boom-bust cycle, or how does that number compare?
I think it's a good number. You know, housing is one of the key elements you look at when you're forecasting the economy. If you're building more houses, that means there's more people coming in. There will be population growth. You know, one of the issues I see facing Tucson is there's not enough homeowners, and there's a ton of renters. And so what happens when you build new houses is you'll have people either move up from an existing home to a better one. You'll have people that are currently renting that can then buy a lower level home. It's a good sign for the future. I don't believe it's a boom bust. I mean, people that build homes, they're pretty particular before they'll start that construction process. No one wants to build a home and not be able to sell it. So they're looking at the same numbers that George Hammond's looking at and that others are looking at, and they are forecasting there will be enough demand. And so they're forecasting there will be an increased population, and there will be people that are going to be moving out of rentals into their own homes, which is always a good thing.
David, do you remember what the numbers were like with those housing starts in 07? 05?
07, I don't recall.
When it was rising so
quickly. It was well over I think this year looking at 2,500 or not even 3,000 permits. I don't recall the exact number. It was in the 40, maybe the 4,500 range, or
Yeah, I'm just throwing that on
you.
It'd
be interesting to see where and what parts of Tucson. I mean, I know there's a lot of growth up northwest, northeast into the foothills area. It'd be interesting to see if we get some growth south and east as far as new homes being built. You know, if it does, that's a good sign for our whole economy and that it's not just specific areas that are being targeted.
I want to shift topics just a little bit. I mean, we'll stay on the economy and the local economy, but David, we've been talking about federal spending and how much of an impact it has on the local economy. This week, it was announced that Raytheon got a contract for more than $500 million to build some more, I think it's some more missiles. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, what is it for? Let's start with that.
That's for the Raytheon, a program that Raytheon has for missile defense with the Missile Defense Agency, and that is for the Standard Missile Block 2A missile, which is a new, longer-range, bigger missile. It's still in development, actually. You have, with missile defense, this concurrency of development and production. So They just had a recent successful flight test. They're going to do another, which didn't have an intercept actually. It was to test some instruments and guidance sections and booster separation and so forth. So they'll be doing a flight test with an intercept this coming year. It's one of the Standard Missile 3 program is one of Raytheon's most important programs. A prior version of the Standard Missile is already on ships. It's part of the first phase of what's called the phased adaptive approach to missile defense for Europe. So there are actually Raytheon missiles, the Standard Missile 1B, which is an earlier version, aboard guided missile cruisers and destroyers in the Mediterranean and around there. And there's also plans, and now they're building a land-based version of that. It's always been a ship-based missile. It was based on a ship defense missile, actually, the Standard Missile 2. And now they're building a thing called Aegis Ashore. Aegis is the name of the system.
That's what this contract is for?
No, but it will play into that. Some of these missiles could go to that site in Romania, which is a land-based site. That, I don't believe, is going to be up until 2018 timeframe. But these contracts are let over a long period of time. There's only a certain amount of funds obligated incrementally. I think there's only $10 million in funding for this contract, but they're on track with that.
Well, real quickly, I just want to ask if the $500 million sounds like a lot of money.
It is.
But in the context of missile defense and missile development, how does that compare to other contracts?
You have to look at over the period of time it would be, but it's one of their larger contracts. They just got, I think, a contract in that range for some for some air defense missiles. It's something that keeps the assembly lines, the development work, particularly at Raytheon, running. Some of the final assembly now is done in Huntsville.
Okay, but the development is here in Tucson.
But the development, a lot of the sensor work and integration is done here, most of that.
I'm rushing you through this because we can't end a show this week on economic development and the economy in the region without talking about the mining situation and copper mining. First, let's talk about Freeport-McMoRan, which is announced that it's closing a mine. What's going on there, David?
They are shutting down their mine up near Green Valley, Sarita. It's about 450 jobs will be lost. It's not a huge surprise.
That's following some other layoffs, right?
Yes, that's the whole thing. It's not a huge surprise. Copper's hurting right now. All the copper companies are hurting. The price is down low. The cost for doing business hasn't dropped with it. So, I mean, anytime you see your profits drop, there's got to be some response. Shutting a mine's a big one. Layoffs is obviously the first step, and then they try to cut other places. Shutting the mine's a big step, but it's not a huge surprise for people that follow the mining industry.
Is the reduction in copper pricing going to affect other mines in the area?
It will, and it has resulted in some cutbacks at other mines already. Sarco has cut some production, I think. They've let some people go as well.
So what's going on with are Sarco workers actually on strike, or is this a precursor to a strike that's happening there?
They could strike. Right now they're working without a contract, and they, both sides, when negotiations broke down, filed complaints with the National Labor Relations Board. The National Labor Relations Board, I believe in October, came back with a formal complaint against the company. There'll be a hearing on that in January. And that could result in some sanctions, or more likely I think it will force a mediation. But the unions have said that the companies notified them that they will impose their final best offer on, as of last week, I believe, and that included no wage increases, no copper price bonus until it reached, I think, $2.70 a pound. It's around $2 now, and cuts to some medical benefits, retiree benefits, I believe. So nobody's really happy. I think that in January, I think it's January 12th, they'll have an NLRB hearing. And it's right now they're kind of at loggerheads. They are still meeting. I believe they're supposed to meet this month yet, even after they had come out and they had a demonstration that Tuesday, I think it was Tuesday last, when they said they were going to impose this new contract. They were out picketing the headquarters. So it's going to come to a head at some point. Right now there's no contract. And they're not close to getting one right now.
And just like Freeport's decision to close a mine, this is all related to copper pricing going taking a steep dive, right?
Right. Certainly the copper price bonuses. Right. There was a lawsuit involving which workers got the bonus a couple years ago.
And I'm going to have to cut you off there because we are out of time. Thank you both for coming in, both the Davids. As always, you can catch up on news or comment on our work at our website. Next week, we'll hear from authors who wrote about the border. Thanks for watching.